Good evening. In 1947, American pilot Kenneth Arnold reported seeing objects flying in formation at nearly 2,000 miles an hour. The media leapt on two words he used to describe what he saw: flying saucers. And so began the modern UFO phenomenon. Today, there is one small town in America where UFO mania has swept through the local population, sparking off an unprecedented frenzy of reported sightings and bizarre claims. Could hundreds of witnesses be mistaken, or is there really something out there?
The town of Gulf Breeze spends its time basking in the subtropical sun of the Florida Panhandle. Separated from the mainland, it wallows in the superheated waters of the Gulf of Mexico. Nothing much used to happen in this small, affluent town, apart from the occasional wrath of a hurricane. But on November the 11th, 1987, a new storm hit town that would change the lives of some of the residents forever.
My thoughts were to catch a picture of it as it went overhead. This strange blue beam came out of it and struck me.
And this object was just hovering, it was perfectly still.
We're seeing something that we're obviously seeing, but we have no concept of what it is that we're seeing.
Oh, look, drop! Look! It's coming towards us, isn't it closer to us?
Whoa! Go!
It was a reader's contribution to a local Gulf Breeze newspaper which sparked off a unique phenomenon which would draw in tens of thousands of people.
I returned to the office one day, and my secretary said that a man had brought in some UFO photographs taken in Gulf Breeze. I looked at them, and they were Polaroids, and I felt, how do you fake a Polaroid? My folks stopped in the office, and I said, you're not going to believe what we're getting ready to run in the paper this week. And they looked at the photographs, and they said, where'd you get these photographs? That's what we saw. And it turns out that they saw the same night, the same craft. I lost all inhibitions about going big with the story, because if you can't trust your mother, who can you trust?
The story had a major impact on the town. TV and newspaper reporters flocked to the area to investigate.
To report sightings of unidentified flying objects known as UFOs.
They weren't the only ones looking into it. Don Ware, a retired colonel in the US Air Force, and Charles Flanagan were sent by MUFON, the International UFO Organization, to investigate the origin of the Polaroids.
In those photos, there were two key details that was of primary interest to me. One was an electrical junction box that sits high on the pole, and the other was where the photographer had to have been standing behind a cedar tree.
The photos had been delivered by a local man, Ed Walters, who said they'd been taken by a neighbor who wanted to remain known only as Mr. X.
We were kind of concerned about finding out exactly which neighbor of Ed's was Mr. X and where the pictures were taken.
We drove streets at all times of the day looking for those two key objects. Eventually, after 7 or 8 days, we found the location.
Lo and behold, it turned out to be Ed's front yard.
Ed Walters was a well-known man in Gulf Breeze. A pillar of the community, he employed over 200 people in his successful building firm and had a good reputation, something he didn't want to lose.
I was concerned the UFO stigma would stick. And certainly, you just don't want to be known as the general contractor who sees UFOs. So when I first went to the newspaper, I said, oh, a friend of mine, you know. But of course, you know, the friend of mine story just never does hold up.
With Ed Walters admitting he had taken the Polaroids, the MUFON investigators moved up a gear.
Had no idea at all at that point how big this case may become.
January 7th, 1988.
But as with all investigations, we must remain skeptical, but with an open mind.
Well, gentlemen, I believe these are what you came to see. Mr. Walters, you mind telling us how you came to take these photographs?
I deal in concrete and steel and real life. And to look out my window at my office at my house and see something unusual didn't necessarily bother me, because normally you would explain it away. And I got up from my desk and kind of looked through the window, and it's behind the trees. What is that? So I grabbed a camera, a little Polaroid camera I use on job sites. The more time I looked at it, which this was all happening very quickly, the more I realized that this was not something I could explain away. A lot of thoughts went through my mind. My goodness, could I really be looking at a UFO? This was a very magnificent looking craft, silent, wingless. The UFO turned and started in my direction. My thoughts were to catch a picture of it as it went overhead. This strange blue beam came out of it and struck me. Having said that, you must realize that that sounds bizarre to my ears. So I know that somebody listening to me say I was struck by a blue beam, their eyes have got to roll back in their head and go, oh my goodness, this is true.
From the initial meeting with Ed Walters, he was extremely cooperative. I found him to be a very detailed individual, and I enjoyed working with him. I would ask Ed the same question 2 or 3 times, only I would word it in different ways. And always it came up with the same conclusion.
Ed Walters' pictures also attracted the interest of Dr. Bruce Maccabee, an optical physicist with the US Navy. He's worked, among other things, on the Strategic Defense Initiative, or Star Wars project. He spent over 30 years investigating UFO sightings.
A lot of time was spent on the first photograph to determine whether or not it could have been created as a simple double exposure. It seemed to be if not a legitimate photo, if it was a hoax, it was extremely difficult. George Lucas could probably do with the strange light company that he runs, but Ed Walters couldn't do with his little Polaroid.
But not everyone was impressed. Ed was accused of hoaxing and publicly ridiculed in the press. The story might have ended there until another witness came forward, church elder Art Hufford.
They were putting front page headlines about UFO experts declaring Gulf Breeze photographs a hoax and claiming that it was something that somebody had done in a dark room with trick photography. And that made me a little angry because I knew there was no trick photography or mirrors on the windshield of my car.
Art claimed to have witnessed the same UFO as Ed photographed just a few miles away on the same day.
My wife and I had been in town and setting up tables at our church. As we were driving towards our home, suddenly up ahead I saw this craft hovering above trees, and I pointed it out to my wife, and we watched this thing as I drove toward it. It looked like nothing we had ever seen before. This oval crown-shaped looking craft had a very bright white light on the top, and the base of the craft was emitting a bright white light as well.
That's not a helicopter, that's not a plane.
And it was just hovering there above the trees, probably 2, maybe 3 blocks in front of our car. My concept at the time of people who had reported UFO sightings, I always thought that was probably somebody who had too much to drink or something.
It became apparent that it was not just an Ed Walters UFO, because many other witnesses came forward, city council people, ministers, so many people that we felt like it was a whole community-wide thing.
From November of 1987 to July of 1988, there were probably well over 100 sightings with several hundred witnesses involved.
The floodgates had opened. It seemed that everyone had a UFO story.
I saw what I thought was a shooting star, and it went whew, like this and just stopped. And then all of a sudden, another one came whew, like this.
The red light came in and it pulsated for a while, and then it turned bright white.
And there was this huge orange globe hanging there. It was about like 4 stories high, and it was hovering over the water.
I was walking and looked up and I saw a big shining green oval shining right through the cloud. It was very vivid color, very bright neon green.
It was a very bright red light, most like a traffic light up in the sky almost, all by itself, and it just came in from nowhere.
And another one came from another direction, like that. And they just kind of hovered.
It terrified me because I was afraid to keep on walking, but there's nowhere I could go and nobody could hear me if anything was going to happen to me.
4 orange balls just popped in with 3 balls on the top, big, bright, reddish-orange balls, and I thought, oh my God, what is that?
My wife was driving me to the post office, that's where I work, and she noticed something shoot in front of our car. And she said, Ken, did you see that?
And I could only yell at him saying, look out of the window, look out the side window, there's something out there, look out there, there's a plane or a helicopter.
It appeared like you could see through some layers of it, although it wasn't totally transparent, like a marble would be, okay? And inside there appeared to be some swirling gas or fluids.
Around the center of it, there was one light that was chasing around, you know, like Christmas tree lights, and this object was just hovering. I wasn't really afraid, I couldn't use that term, just sheer amazement, because I just couldn't believe, you know, you can't believe your eyes.
There's nothing.
It's right.
I spent 7 years in the Air Force. I've seen many different aircraft. We're seeing something that we're obviously seeing, but we have no concept of what it is that we're seeing.